Right. Order. Welcome to the meeting of the Culture, Media and Sports Select Committee. Today we are focusing on independent production as we continue our inquiry into British film and high-end TV. Before beginning, do any members have any interest to declare? No? In which case, we're delighted today to be hearing from James Hawes, who is the director behind Slow Horses and, of course, the recent brilliant film One Life. Vice Chair of Directors UK, has just wrapped his latest film. So we're really, really grateful, James, that you could find the time to speak to us today. And I'm going to kick off the question. So you recently directed your first feature film after very many years of working in TV. It's a journey that a lot of people would like to make, but can you describe to us about how it happened?
Slowly. And part of that has been about the power of television recently, and of high-end TV particularly. That's been a great place to innovate, to create, to play. It's been something which we'll touch on, obviously, that this country is very good at. So people dream and have an ambition to move into film. It's difficult, obviously. It's hugely competitive, more money's at stake. Making that leap is traditionally difficult, and with respect to some of those behind me, there has been a certain sniffiness towards people from television historically, much less so more recently. So I think high-end TV has enabled that move. You tend to have been working with far glossier cast, more grown-up cast, bigger ambition, bigger budgets in television that give producers confidence that you can probably make that step to the big screen with less risk.
And so we've been beginning to take evidence for this inquiry, and the theme that's coming through is, while there is obviously huge investment in our production facilities from overseas, in some cases it's about the struggles of British independent film. Would you be able to talk to us at all about that?
Yes, to some extent. Again, One Life was my first film and my first indie film. Now, it's doing incredibly well at the box office. It is, in terms of an indie film, a popular hit, competing with Belfast and Banshees of Inisherin over the last few years, certainly in post-pandemic. But even setting that up was a struggle. And during pre-production, there were times when it was uncertain, and without the help of people like BBC Films, it would not have come about. Now, what's that about? It's at the higher level of indie films in terms of budget, pushing towards the 15 million that is a figure that's being talked about. That is because it was set in two time periods. It involved kids and trains, and we had a fairly glossy cast that need looking after and have costs that come with them. So ambition tends to come at a price. And meeting that ambition and convincing people that this was a film that would sell beyond its Britishness is a key factor.
But with regard to getting the film made in the first place, I mean, if you were to have made that film 10 years ago, easier, harder, same? I'm
going to defer on that, because being new to film, you should ask that question really of some of the people who are coming up later.
What have your experiences in TV, given that there's now a sort of segue between high-end TV, well, TV in general, in particular high-end TV and filmmaking that didn't exist so much many years ago. What do you say, what were the skills that you learned along the way that have prepared you now to be able to go into filmmaking?
I think it is about ambition and scale as much as anything else. I'll speak again about the quality of the technical and creative skills we have in this country, and this committee is well versed in that, but it is really special. There was a point in the sort of 2010s when the BBC, particularly Channel 4 to some extent, were making films at that point for BBC 4, single movies. I did one about Enid Blyton, there was one about the Chatterley affair, there was one about Kenneth Williams, and they really punched above their weight. And for the first time, big screen cast were being attracted to the small screen in a way that hadn't happened for a while. And that divide between TV and film began to be bridged. I think that was a key moment. There were then some big television series, not necessarily all here. House of Cards was one, Game of Thrones was another, that proved that in these islands we could make big, ambitious television with scale, with huge scope, and to accommodate bigger budgets. So that started to, literally the setup, the number of people you'd have on set a day grew exponentially. You could start to imagine bigger stories. You could start to be really quite wild in your imagining of the possibilities, where you could take something to. Previously, you were very much in a room looking in. Suddenly, you could go outside in a way that wasn't the case before. And you could think more internationally in terms of the types of stories you would tell.
With regard to that international viewpoint, to what extent would you say that influx of international investment has impacted your career?
In various ways. And we've got to be careful to look at all of these. Obviously, there is a considerable benefit to that inward investment. It has built, nurtured, and grown the industry and the people around. It has built the production companies and made us a place really respected for high-end film, TV and film. There are downsides. There are downsides because that has inflated costs, and therefore domestic production is finding it harder to compete for some of the best practitioners. It's been very busy out there, not right now, which is something we should talk about, because this committee could not be sitting at a more critical time, frankly, for our industry right now. It has given North America, to whom we must look, confidence in what we're doing. And it's really intriguing. That Slow Horses, when that was first pitched, it had trouble getting going. I know Cecil Films would not mind me saying this, that it looked for a home at some of the UK broadcasters first of all and wasn't picked up. When Apple did pick it up, they wondered whether it was just too quirky and too British and whether this would travel, even though obviously we have a reputation for the spy genre. The attachment of Gary Oldman, its subsequent success, shows that even quirky British can travel, and it is now the longest-running repeated series on Apple. So I think high-end TV has come here, it's found a home, it's found success, that has built our profile internationally and hugely. It has shown that we can think beyond British parochial, or we can turn British smaller stories into ones that have an outward glance and that have universal themes. And I think that's really important. We have to be aware of the balance, the critical balance, between the benefits of inward investment and having our own domestic industry.
That's what we hope to help with. Julie.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, James.
Morning.
What influences your decisions about where to shoot your TV series and films? And is it entirely driven by the storytelling, or do costs, availability of staff, or ease of working play a part in your decision?
The answer is that they all play a huge part in my decision and production decision. Now, the film I've just finished, let's look at various examples here, but that is an American studio film. When I came on board, they were still looking at the possibility of filming it in Georgia, in Budapest, in Romania. Tax break was key. Also, what sort of locations we need and can offer. The body of technical crew that are available, absolutely. The general working environment. What's it going to feel like? How smoothly can we run the logistics? You know the logistics of running any film or television show, and the bigger it is, the more complicated they are considerable. There are downsides sometimes here. I've worked in production hubs from Prague, Budapest, Cape Town, recently back from Marseille and from Istanbul. I was frustrated on Slow Horses at times where permissions would not be granted for film locations. Some film offices are far more welcoming and enabling than others. It's not a general, not seen generally, especially in London, as that we're a film-friendly city in that way. There was an example recently in Marseille where we had a problem with a heritage building. Now, Marseille has recently been earmarked by the president, no less, as somewhere that film could be built as an industry. And the message goes down to local government there that if there are any issues with the production, send it to the President's office. Now, I don't suppose he crossed his desk and he read the details, but just that message getting out there is enormously empowering for regional production and makes it a better home for internationals to then turn up and go, yes, okay, we know we've got a good chance of achieving what we want to. Mm-hmm. So it is a mix of all of those. Obviously, creative comes first.
And you've partially answered this, but what does the UK do well as a filming location compared to overseas locations? And are there any areas we could improve to maintain competitiveness?
I mean, the tax break is key. Absolutely fundamental. I mean, one of the conversations with the producers recently was, what is the tax break in different countries? How is it changing? What's it shifting? How is it cash flowed? What is the cost of money going to be to us? Because that's another element. What are the above the line post costs that are going to be there for us? Again, I'd ask you to talk to a producer about that rather than me. These are things I've picked up in corridors. But I know that is critical to their positioning for us. What do we do well? Our technical crew. We're really good at that. And you compare that, our technical and creative, so I mean everything from makeup and costume through the grips and electrics. We have those, we have a great tradition of those. We have to maintain it, but that's there and therefore something you can bank on. To the extent that when I've worked with some international DOPs on other jobs, they have flown out gaffers or grips to take away with them because we've got the best. We should also talk about the front of camera, especially for North America. We have English-speaking, brilliant on-screen talent, recognizable talent. It's at home. They're happy to be at home. They often want to work here. That is enormous for our industry.
Finally, how does the experience of shooting differ depending on where in the country you are? So I'm talking about the UK here. What would help to get more production shooting beyond the southeast of England?
Mostly, it's about logistics. Again, without wanting to tell you what you already know well, but the logistics of moving a production of 200 or 300 people sometimes to Cornwall, where I come from, the transport, the accommodation, and then moving them from wherever they're staying to the hotels. Just every day, a producer once said to me, look, James, it doesn't matter whether you shoot fast or quick or well or badly, I'm still counting £50 notes at the same pace all day, every day. So we plan for efficiency. We plan for maximum creative time. So that's absolutely a feature. Of course, having some studios, some hubs is useful. Whether you can always sustain a hub, I mean, we have some fantastic centres. If I look to Glasgow, where I've worked, because that was once, is still a mini BBC, the culture is there and the blend of production facilities are there to enable a production to feel comfortable. So it helps. Logistics is great. Local film officers who are proactive and will enable is really important. I hope that answers to some extent your question.
Thank you.
Thanks, Julie. Alex?
I have one question. So we're coming up to the budget now, 6th of March. You talked about tax credits, but if you were in the lift with the Chancellor and you wanted to ask him what contribution they could make in the budget to the film industry, what would you ask?
It's got to be about tax credits and tiered tax credits that are the mix of enabling television, high-end television and film, as well as British domestic film to punch its weight in a way that we have done. I mean, I've been talking to some of the people, for instance, who've enabled One Life recently. It's punched above its weight. I saw the January session that you held here, and we talked about Barbenheimer and what that began to do to cinemas. Even in the last 6 weeks, the beginning of this year, there is a sense that we're getting close to pre-pandemic levels. And if you look at the films that have recently been out, international films, but also British films, any one of several could have won that BAFTA the other night. It was a pretty strong lineup. We need to make sure that those voices are still being heard. the support of the indie film sector is not just, it's about our culture, it's about finding a way to express Britishness, to tell stories to ourselves, something that I feel is going to be harder and harder to do as AI becomes more a thing, and I'd love to touch on AI at some point. It is about the pipeline. We touched on how I got to do what I do. The path I trod is gone now. The landscape is disappeared. So the importance of independent film as a development for ideas, for talent on both sides of the camera, for trumpeting British culture, telling stories to ourselves, we are essentially storytellers, is huge. And I think the biggest practical thing has got to be down to those incentives.
Thank you very much. We are going to come to AI, but first of all, we're going to come to Damien.
Yes, well, I'll restrain myself on AI and talk about the strikes, which clearly were had a huge effect last year. And are they still having a lingering effect?
Huge. So let me give you a personal experience there as well. We were 6 weeks into this American film shooting here on July the 14th, and we were shut down for 4.5, nearly 5 months. Not a penny was spent in the meantime. That was a decision made by that particular studio that there wasn't even any editing allowed, nothing. Everybody was sent home. The vast majority of my crew did not work then during that period. I hear figures of 75% of the industry out of work during that period. You may be aware that there was a news piece from Beck 2 over the weekend and then again repeated at an RTS speech the last couple of days about partly the legacy of that. And it has been the double whammy, the perfect storm that's been talked about of pandemic and then the strikes. I think that tells us that something at the moment about our reliance on inward investment and that there wasn't enough equity-based work, domestically funded work, to sustain the industry in between, and the knock-ons are huge. I'm sitting in an edit suite in Soho at the moment, and there are a lot of people seeing when's the next job coming. Now, we're here, there is an uptick. This is a vibrant industry, but we go through these phases. This is an industry that is going to be in demand in the future. It's one we're very good at, but we need to help build in resilience, and we need that resilience to be domestic.
I'm going to come on to resilience in a second, but what's happened though? I mean, if you say 75% of the industry was sort of out of work for 6 months, basically, have people left the industry?
Some have, especially the juniors, which is of course a worry at a time we're trying to recruit more in. I can't pretend that it's been other than rough for a lot of those people. That and understanding that they are freelancers for the most part, so there is nowhere to fall back on.
So they've literally gone off?
Some are literally going off. Now, there are electricians who can go and be electricians. There are makeup teams who do get other jobs, but they will come back if they can.
What you think? Yes, they want to work.
Yes, they want to work. When it's working, it's fabulous. When it's working, it's thrilling. We're all nutty enough to want to do it. And it will push through. But we have been hit by a couple of big side blows.
So, I mean, you talk about resilience and an industry that's by and large freelancers, front, behind the camera, everyone. It is the original gig economy. How do you make that kind of system more resilient?
I think above all by variety. I think that's how individually I've made a career resilient, is by zigzagging as you go. It's, I think, here, and this takes us into another area, but I think it's about the PSBs being as active as they possibly can. The other thing we've got going on, obviously, is a huge shift in the streaming marketplace, the terrestrial marketplace. I think it's being clear that we're not utterly reliant on inward investment, that we are making programs for our own market as well. I think it's about helping those freelancers. I'm not suggesting we suddenly provide income for them in the data, but if I look at France or Ireland or South Korea, think of nations that we know for managing to sell their culture very successfully abroad. They all have systems for supporting creatives who have proven themselves to be in the industry in periods where they're between jobs. Now, one of the ways to do that here is to protect IP actively for all the rights holders, for the creative authors, that we have that there as part of our... for me, it's been critical that it's part of my R&D fund. It's bridging the gaps when I'm holding out for a better job or waiting in between just any job. So part of that is protect IP so that people, individuals and smaller companies, have some sort of bank to fall back on.
When you say protect IP, do you mean, as it were, legislating to protect IP, or just somehow altering the terms of trade, particularly with the streamers?
Both. Terms of trade, particularly with the streamers, where currently it is a buyout. We have seen not just income, but our access to the success of our programs, and that's what it's about, is if we make a program that sells well around the world, that we benefit in part of that. The streamers offer buyouts. That system, and that's something that, for instance, Directors UK is actively talking about at the moment and looking for difference there. That is how we support our creatives. That is how we support the authors. If I look, I'm going to give you an example. I set up a show called Merlin, a family show on the BBC. I got to play with dragons. It was rather wonderful. What I was initially offered was not what I or my agents felt was suitable for where I should be. We managed to do a contract with a production company that offered me 5% of net international. I don't think anybody thought it was going to be terribly much. That season ran 5 seasons. I still thank Merlin and the Dragon regularly because it has helped me make some brave decisions and spend some of my own money developing ideas ever since. I think that's vital. I think that's a model.
Kind of almost like the repeat fees that in the 70s and 80s, my dad, was permanently popping up on It'll Be All Right on the night, and
yes.
I mean, it was very
exactly that. So not necessarily contractual, but as part of the deal with the streamers.
Okay, interesting. Thank you. Ryan Gosling's Body Double.
Thank you. I pop up on some of these as well, and they're always excruciating, but the repeat fees are very nice. Thank you for joining us. And it's very interesting when you talk about moving from television and all the very talented directors who work in other fields of television into the movies, because my background's news and current affairs, and I think of some of the producers and directors that I worked with in Panorama, for example, and Assignment, who just were incredibly talented filmmakers making very complicated subjects accessible in news and current affairs, and so many of them should have moved into, I think, filmmaking. But there was a prejudice, wasn't there?
Yes, but many did. I mean, my second ever job was in news and current affairs at Lime Grove on That's Life.
That's where I started, in Lime Grove.
Which people forget was part of news and current affairs, but there we were. And it's really important to talk about that route, which is something the public broadcasters gave us. Paul Greengrass, Charles Sturridge, Susanna White, many others came from that sort of broadcast experience. Think of Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, directed by James Strong. He started making news inserts at HTV. Directors at the moment of hit shows, currently on Netflix, began within Channel 4, as part of the staff there, making short films. I think it's, again, I'm going to use the phrase storytellers. It teaches the discipline of how to tell a story.
And you had to do it in a very tight
Yeah.
budget. I remember sometimes when I worked in Newsnight, and they would say, it's 5 o'clock, cancel your plans, you've got to have a film ready for 10:30. And we'd have to do a hot switch. We'd still be editing the second half of the film as the first half was being broadcast. I mean, it was terrifying. I worked with Ken Loach's son on Watchdog and many others who are really talented. But that's not what I wanted to talk to you about. I wanted to talk to you about AI. And AI is post my time in television. But I've been following it very closely. And you said, I do hope we get to talk about AI earlier on. How do you? Let me ask just a very obvious and general question. How do you anticipate that AI will affect filmmaking as we go forward? I know that actors, in particular, are terrified about the long-term effects on their profession. Where do you see things going?
If you'd asked me this a week ago, I would have given you perhaps a more tempered answer. I saw something on Thursday that makes me think the changes are coming dramatically and very, very soon.
What was that?
Can I come to that in a moment in the ways of holding my dramatic reveal in a moment?
This is a trailer.
This is a trailer. We at Directors UK held a forum not long ago about Doctors, the BBC show that's been cancelled, and the concern there was that it had been such a vital training ground for many, many people coming through. Another one that's gone. One of the members there started talking about AI, and it sent me investigating into how long it would be before a show like Doctors can be made entirely by generative AI. And I took a poll with various VFX people. And it shortened. I then spoke to some of the legal team who advised SAG and Writers Guild over the summer ahead of coming here. And the best guess is between 3 to 5 years. Somebody will be able to say, create me a scene in an ER room where a doctor comes in, he's having an affair with a woman, so they're flirting, and somebody's dying on the table. And it will start to create it. And you will build those, and it will be generative AI. Now, it may not be as polished as we've been used to, but that's how close we're getting. And I found that hard to believe for all the creatives involved. I believe the genie's out of the bottle. I believe we have to live with this. I think it also is incredibly enabling. I think there are all parts of storytelling and British storytelling that can be fueled and enabled by this. But we have to protect the rights holders now. We have to protect those whose copyright is being scraped and scoured to form some of these things. And then last Thursday, something hit the internet called Sora. And it's by one of the companies called OpenAI, and they're all Silicon Valley. And the expert I was talking to said to me, I thought this might happen in 18 months to 2 years, and suddenly it's here. And to describe what it is, again, text generative, so somebody has just typed or spoken into a machine, give me a scene of a woman in Tokyo walking through a rainy street, and it produces it. It's not library footage assembled, it is digitally produced. It's not live action perfect, but it's pretty damn close. There's a dragon festival. It's hard to tell whether it's real or not. That's happening now. So I think protections need to be now. I think we need to be meeting regularly and actively and angrily defending our creatives.
Are we being Luddite? Is this inevitable? No. And we might lament its passing in the same ways we might lament letter writing as a form of communication, but it's inevitable.
I think it's inevitable. I don't think we can be Luddite or afford to be. I think we've got to be embracing it and harnessing it and getting to learn what it can do for us. I do imagine, colleagues behind me again may feel differently, that there will be a twin-track evolution here. I think there will continue to be humans telling stories, and I think humans must be at the heart of telling these stories. Again, the AI will need people to guide it, to drive it, to help shape those stories. It will be a storytelling tool. We'll be able to create the rainy streets of Tokyo in a way that we couldn't before.
Why would a film company choose to use expensive actors in the future when they could make just as much money using AI?
Because things, for the foreseeable future, human things still happen. Let me give you an example from One Life that I mentioned at a screening and seemed to strike a chord. We're on the set with Anthony Hopkins. And he loves being on set. He sits on an apple box on the edge of set. He's not one of those who disappears to the Winnebago. There was a grand piano on the set. It had nothing to do with the story particularly, but he's a showman. And he sat down, lifted the cover to the keys, and started playing beautifully. And a lot of grips and electricians will always remember that day and took their stories home. he was surrounded by the mess of his life in that moment. The character was due to do a scene where they came to the dresser to take a drink in a moment of the end of Act 2, depressed and down. And I saw an opportunity. And we had Anthony as Nicholas Winton playing the piano, worked into the scene. Because of something he did, something I saw, AI's not going to predict that. It's not going to invent that. It's not yet got the human soul, the human experience, which is why I think there will be twin track for a long time to come. And we will choose that. Somebody was very reductive in their description of it, said it's like mechanically recovered meat and organic burgers. And we need labelling to understand some of these things. And we will eventually make our choices, and there will probably be cost differentials. But I tell you what, we in this country need to be grasping what it is now. We are behind at the moment. We need to be talking to some of those brilliant people in Soho. We need directors to be getting trained and enabled to understand it. We need writers and other creators to be doing similarly. And that's something that you guys can help with.
As a vegetarian, I hope we move beyond that to burgers that don't involve any animal suffering. It must have been incredible for you, having started out in Lime Grove with That's Life, then to end up making a film about the life of Sir Nicholas Winton, who, of course, famously was revealed on That's Life episode.
And I am now proud to be a member of the That's Lifers WhatsApp group, which Esther has allowed me back onto.
Why did you? Why, you
because I worked
back on it. You plotted your copybook.
No. But I was only briefly there, and I'm told I was a dreadful researcher, but have become a better director. Thank you, Esther.
Just very quickly, something you said around the skills and the training. How do we help ensure that our production and our directors have the skills and training that they need to be able to adjust to this new world, and what can the government do to help?
Several things. I'm going to talk about indie film, low budget film again, because that is such a test bed. There is no set pathway. There wasn't when I began. There is even less so now. But making small films, moving to their first indie film, being allowed to do a second film, maybe move sideways into high-end television, that is absolutely a route. And that's one we need to make sure is fluid and protected. We need to help with all kinds of training and making whatever apprenticeships work within a freelance structure, as many don't. Because the nature is freelance, and a lot of apprenticeships try and put people into permanent jobs that don't exist. I think that's key. Support the industry in its structure as it is. We need to... there are a lot of brilliant organisations, the BFI, Directors UK, BEC2, BAFTA, BBC, all have training schemes. We need to make sure those are nurtured, and we need to make sure the PSBs are doing as much as they can to have destinations for the people they train. And obviously the worry about cutting shows like Doctors, which have to be cut for budget reasons and for reasons of shift in audience preferences. But we lost Doctors, Holby City, half of Casualty, many of the shows that people used to go from the soaps as they worked their way up to be somebody as fortunate as I am. And I really worry about where we're going to train our directors now. And there is some joined up thinking that needs to be done to look at the whole ecosystem.
Before I come to you, Simon, Alex.
So, just looking at television for a moment, we've got a lot of platforms now, a lot of channels, a lot of streaming services, all content hungry, all vying for income, all with budgetary pressures, which you've spoken about. What you're saying now about AI, are we almost at a point where a producer can get a group of writers, they can write a script, they can feed it into the AI, they don't need a director, they don't need actors, they don't need grips, they don't need a studio, and then they can put it on a platform and they've got a brand new show. Is that the soon to be realised future?
Not yet, and I don't think they will get rid of all those people. I think they will need all those creators. And if we look at the American model, it's been very firmly said we need a director and we need a writer at the heart of what those shows are. We need those creative storytellers. We need those people to own IP. Only a human can own the IP. It is about harnessing it and understanding it. Elon Musk said we should wait for 6 months and that everybody would take a pause and work out how fast AI was developing, and people rather laughed at him because they realized not everybody would. I think what he was expressing, dare I even double guess Elon Musk, was recognizing how fast things are evolving and that we need to understand that and we need to protect our industry by harnessing it and being part of it.
Do you think we need regulation, or do we need to wait to see how it pans out if we regulate?
No, I think we do, to protect, at very least, the rights holders now. I mean, there is IP being scoured and pirated right now. We need to be protecting that. And obviously we need to be working with the AI developers, but that needs to be an active, energetic conversation, respecting the rights and the businesses of both sides, and with a firm view on what the end product is, including telling British stories. My worry is if we don't get up there doing that, the AI-generated stories will be coming from elsewhere. We need to have our AI classy storytellers here as well.
Charles, did you want to come in on that?
Yes, a very short one, if I may, and I apologise for my lateness in arrival, but I was talking to the Chancellor about film production.
That's my question.
But yeah, it's a good excuse, and I'll stick to it.
Very efficient, yeah.
But I just wanted to ask, are we not being slightly alarmist about AI? I know your background was in theatre, and as indeed mine was, and a lot of people in the room probably were. AI isn't going to impinge too much into that incredible feeder stream for the high end in the end, apart from perhaps the development of scripts. But as you point out, AI is not and never will be sentient.
No, I think that's crucial, and I think of people like Charlie Brooker, who tried commissioning ChatGPT to write an episode of Black Mirror, and it seemed like the right script to try, and his language was less than flattering about what came back at him. It was sort of broadly structurally there. I mean, I have to tell the committee that before coming in, I asked ChatGPT to come up with the questions you might ask me, and so far it's scoring pretty high. But we also have to think of examples of theatre. Sorry, that was directly challenging. And if you think of ABBA Live at the moment, there is an example of...
The same with the answer.
Intelligence, AI putting on stage in front of you in the moment the original performers.
That's a challenge.
Of course it is, and I completely agree with you that we have a way to go, but it is amazing what's currently happening. And I agree with you, and would be the first to argue the human soul is everything, and the ability to tell stories is part of what I think defines us as humans, and we should cherish that and nurture it for a long time to come.
But I would argue that creative magic comes out of interpersonal relationships when put on a stage or in an environment, even on a film set. You're just looking at each other.
As I've just described, I agree with Sir Anthony. And I think that will be there. But I also think that all these people telling me over the last couple of weeks, we've got so few years before a version of that is going to be out there on the screens, and some consumers will be happy with that version.
But I go back to my original question, are we not being too alarmist about this?
If I've been alarmist to that degree, then I hope not too alarmist. If I have called to action and said that we need to be in this country taking note and acting on it now and learning it faster, then I think that is measured.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Which countries are, to your knowledge, are taking the right steps on this?
I think in terms of development, then the States and Silicon Valley is way ahead. And also what's happening there with the unions at the moment, straight off the back of the strikes, is they are looking at the protections. And so, for instance, the DGA has got an ongoing conversation with the studios about every few months sitting down and seeing where is it now? What do we need to change in our drafting? And a lot of this will come down to the drafting of the agreements, how we protect an actor's performance. I already, just perhaps to go back on that previous question, in Soho now I could hire a company who could come into my cutting room and I could say the performance of this actor is a bit grim. Can you cheer them up a little bit for me? And they could manipulate the face and the voice to such a degree that you would not know that was changed. So that is there. So that is an element of AI. Again, that can be protected in contract. Those sorts of things need to be in place.
Who will win the Best Director Oscar? Did ChatGPT put that one?
No.
Excellent.
No, I didn't do that. I have a fair idea, but that would be inappropriate insider dealing.
Could be you.
And so who should be driving, sorry, before I get to Simon, who's been waiting so patiently, who should be driving those sort of changes, not the Best Director, who should be driving the changes that you're seeing in the States? Who should be driving that here? Whose responsibility is it?
I think it's got to be a combination of industry stakeholders and government. I think we've got to team up. Now, I know that the BFI, for example, has got a working committee on many of these things, and as they have in training at the moment, I think that's something that we've got to all join together on, and that's how big I think this is.
Last but not least.
Thank you, Chair. We've seen a big debate over the future of public service broadcasting in the last couple of years. And anecdotally, and it might be because, although I'm not that old, I feel old when it comes to looking at the media and the way that it's changed and the way that programmes are commissioned. I don't see as many original dramas, original comedies coming out of public service broadcasting anymore. That might be just my interpretation and what I view, my tastes may have changed, etc. But have you seen a commissioning momentum change away from public service broadcasting towards, for example, the big streamers? If you have, what's that been like and what's the impact?
Yes, there has been a considerable. Now, obviously, a lot of that is funding driven. We should talk again about Mr. Bates versus the Post Office, yes. A programme that very, very nearly didn't happen, as you probably know, and that's quite publicly talked about. And the reason that very nearly didn't happen was because it was thought too British and parochial. It was not a project that could be co-funded. It was not a project they thought was going to sell. Now, more than 20 million viewers have watched it in this country, which is a demonstration perhaps to what you're asking for, that if you can produce that sort of content that chimes with people, there's a market for it. But it costs. That cost because it had a particularly large cast. No other reason than that. There were so many people. It cost more than ITV Studios would normally pay for that kind of show without, and this should be a conversation with the studios, but without knowing that they could sell it to help recoup and offset.
Does that change the confidence in the industry then? Looking at that programme in isolation, does that not prove that it can be done? And offer some hope?
It absolutely does. There are limited slots because there's limited budget and because drama is expensive. I wish we were still doing more. I wish that BBC4 was still doing all those single dramas that would get an audience of 1 or 2 million, but they cost more than could be justified for the audience that they then drew. I would ask that we look at it in terms of its cultural offering, as I know the BBC does, also its training value. That's what I mean by looking at the whole system, the whole environment. There is a feeling now, I read something just over the weekend, that there is an uptick in commissioning coming back again. Obviously, we've had a strange, slightly constipated process over the last couple of years, out of the pandemic into a storm of commissioning to catch up, then a little lull, and the strikes, and a recession. So it's been very uneven. We shouldn't be off-put by that. It will come back. We should be ready for it coming back.
Going back to your overall point then, because you know that programme, which was brilliant, was described as parochial or distinctly British and perhaps a bit inward-looking. No negativity from my point of view, but that's the sort of phrase you used. Do you think the British directors are being hamstrung then, not being able to tell distinctly British stories?
I think hamstrung's too strong. It's extremely... The market is commercial. It's looking for audiences. It's looking for the need to co-produce. Russell T. Davies said something about the Post Office that was very interesting, that in the end, why did we watch it? Not because we're all wannabe postmasters, but because it was about the little man against the machine. It was the David and Goliath, we think the system's against us. It's finding those stories with those universal themes. to some extent, with limited slots in the domestic market, it is far harder to tell the stories we'd like to tell. And things that seem, even with talent attached, absolute slam dunks, get turned down because we don't think we'll travel, we won't get the deficit funding.
Interesting. Did those questions come up on ChatGPT, by the way?
Yes.
Damn it, Simon.
Do better.
James, thank you so much for giving us your time today. It's been a great pleasure to see you. Was there any other messages that ChatGPT didn't provide that you feel...
I'm going to regret that now, aren't I? No, I mean, we've touched on the three things. I perhaps spent too much time on AI. I absolutely believe the deficits are crucial. And I think finding a way to foster directors through and to enable them is absolutely key. And I would want to be part of whatever we can do to enable that.
Of which IP is vital.
Of which IP is absolutely critical because it's part of what keeps it. It's our R&D fund.
Yeah, absolutely.
So if there's any other comments or thoughts that you have after the event, please do feel free to share them with us. But we're really grateful for your time
today. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Good morning to you.
Can we invite our second guest forward, please?
You come on down.
Come on down. Not
Really?
not victim, as Nick described them. Yeah, exactly. And I'd like to very warmly welcome our second witness, who is producer Rebecca O'Brien, who over the past 3 decades has been behind so many of Britain's most successful independent films, works aside leading directors including Lynn Ramsey and Ken Loach. Rebecca, thank you so much for joining us today. Have you looked up our questions on ChatGPT as well?
No, I haven't.
Good,
I'm way behind James, I'm afraid.
Thank goodness for that then. I'd like to sort of almost like carry on from where we were a moment ago, talking about the power of British stories. We've just heard about Mr. Yates versus the Post Office and the global appetite for distinctly British stories. How do we make British independent films commercial hits and build audiences for them across the world without giant Hollywood marketing budget?
That's a very leading question. I think variety is definitely the key, because you don't know what's going to be a success. When we made I, Daniel Blake, for instance, we didn't know that it would be successful in Japan. You know, our films, which, you know, we thought we were making a little film set in the northeast, which was telling story about how things are for certain parts of the community in our land at that time. We had no idea that it would, you know, we wanted to make it because we thought it was an important story to tell. And we've always had support from European partners to make our films. So they've supported whatever story we wanted to tell. And to make it make economic sense to make our films, we need to sell globally. So when we went to Cannes with the film, we did sell to Japan. We have regular distributors around the world who take our films. But Norio Hatano, who is our Japanese regular distributor, was saying, you know, this story is about us as well. You know, this story resonates not just with your people, but it does with us. And so you never know what story might work. I mean, you know, another example is Mr. Bean, which worked globally. Yeah. You know, it's like you don't know until you've done it, which is why we need to do the R&D to get stories up and running, to just have variety open to us.
One of the first bits of evidence we heard was from Gurinder Chadha, who said to us, it's actually quite difficult to get independent films widely distributed into British cinemas. Is that something that you've seen? She was advocating earmarking space in our cinemas for British independent films, having like a best of British screen in the same way that you might have a best of British aisle in a supermarket. I mean, how would you feel about that?
Yeah, it's an idea. I think all sorts of ideas should be tried. I think that one of our problems is the fact that we speak English and we're making films in the English language, and so we're not seen as specifically British, and so we merge sort of seamlessly into films in the English language from wherever. And that can be an advantage and a disadvantage. During the pandemic, it was a disadvantage. I think in France and Germany, for instance, cinemas did really well on local produce. Indigenous films were successful, and they were able to get them out. They were able to make indigenous films during the pandemic, and I think, and also during the strikes, interestingly. Whereas I think it was more because we're so reliant on our friends across the Atlantic. It was much more difficult for us. I think it's a strange badge, because also people think of British films as being, historical dramas or stories from our colonial past or whatever. There are lots of different sorts of British films, or perhaps a sort of lightweight working title type story. I think it's quite. But actually, having said that, you look at the range of different films that were up for the Outstanding British Film BAFTA the other day. The diversity is incredible. I would be delighted to see a dedicated screen for British film in cinemas. I'm not sure it's the answer. It may encourage people to go, but it may also, people. I think it's great to see films from all parts of the world and not just Hollywood. I think it's, again, this year has been incredible for international films, as we've seen with Anatomy of a Fall and Zone of Interest, and some fantastic films from around the world. I think the more global stories we see, we can then see that they actually are things we want to watch.
That sort of global partnership is also increasing, isn't it? Someone said at the BAFTAs on Saturday night that Zone of Interest won Best Film in a Foreign Language and Best British
Film,
which is seems to be a contradiction. But how difficult is it in your experience for independent producers to get their films widely distributed in British cinemas? And is that different from the rest of the world?
I think it's production values. I think, if you make a low budget film, you can't expect to have huge distribution. You have production values, you have big stars in the bigger films. Independents can't necessarily afford to do that, and actually there is a market failure there, because where inward investment has been incredibly successful for this country, it's also taken away a lot of our talent. It's hoovered it up, and we have to keep on running up and running behind and picking up new talent, inventing new talent to fill the gap, which we're very happy to do. But a lower budget film can't afford to have big British stars, and they're all probably scheduled within an inch of their lives working on Hollywood films at Pinewood. So that is a problem. But we are very happy to work with new actors and find and discover people, and that's one of the wonderful things about my job as a British producer is working with new talent and finding people,
which you've done really well at. Damien.
Thank you, Chair, and good morning. Is it getting harder to raise finance for the films you make?
Yes. I'm in the middle of making a film called Harvest, based on a book, best-selling book, British story by author called Jim Crace. And it is, I've had to go scour Europe to get the funding for the film. And we made it during the pandemic. We were unable to raise money from the US. It's an ensemble, it stars an ensemble of British and one American actor, new talent. And it's set in a medieval village at some point in the past, and it's a week in the life of this community, and strangers arrive and things go horribly wrong. So that's the story. But to make this film, I have it's a UK, French, German, Greek, US co-production. with little bits of money patchworked together from all of those different countries, from their public funds, from pre-sales, from little tax credits here and there. We have a Greek director. We have we filmed it all in Scotland. We had Creative Scotland on board. We had BBC Film. We had we had the tax credit. Lots and lots of funding to be able to do it at all. And remarkably, we've done it. We've had private investors as well, so we've done the whole range. Absolutely exhausting to put something like that together. And I think, if we had an enhanced tax credit, for instance, I wouldn't have had to defer my fee. We'd be in a position where we could now finish the film in confidence. But it's been a real struggle just because we haven't quite got enough money to do it.
You anticipated what I was going on to, which was, given that you would like more money available from sort of various public purses, we'll take that as a given. How would you change the structure of the way we support film in this country in a way that would help the sort of small indie type film, or even medium-sized indie film?
It's a difficult one to know the answer to, because I think we are British producers are very adept at getting money from all sorts of places. I think some sort of incentives for investors is important, for them to understand how important the R&D value of the industry is. I think that luckily Brexit hasn't changed the fact that we can still do co-productions in Europe. I think that to keep the possibilities open, to be able to work with partners all over the world is important, because when you work with international partners, you're opening up the possibility for sales in those countries, and sales equals money going into your film. And sales equals audiences. So I think there should be incentives for us not to always look across the Atlantic. I think that's a blinkered approach. I think within the UK it's difficult because sales have dropped. There's market failure because the streamers came in, the high-end TV got higher end, and and Hollywood arrived, and they did take a lot of our investors away. And also, the public service broadcasters have been really vital for us, but they don't have enough money to support people all the time. BFI are concentrating on new filmmakers, and that's important. Public service broadcasters have very limited funds to put in, and any independent film needs to have one of them to be able to kick off funding. So support for them is very, very important for us. But I think, I think some fiscal support, some additional fiscal support for this particular sector is essential. I think we could really die without it, actually.
Yeah, Gunda Chowdhury said that she'd like to see an uplift for films under 15 million to sort of hit that. I assume.
Yes, pretty much all independent British films are under 15 million, and clearly the ones that there are films below a million. Quite a lot of films, first-time films, that are made under that level. But to get production values that will survive cinema audiences and then have decent lives with streamers and with TV companies, you need to have certain production values which raise the budget. We call in favours all the time as well, and our crews and our cast are more expensive because of the market failure that I was talking about. So it's, but we're not seeking to make huge, expensive budget films. We're seeking to tell stories of our own people and things, and you can do that on a relatively low budget. I'd like to do that. I'd like to continue doing that. I like doing smaller projects because you know everybody, and it's great to see people then evolve into better filmmakers and themselves and better crew.
And from what you say, it sounds like the irony that we've all appreciated that the fact that we have all these craft skills and all the things people celebrate means that we attract a lot of big, often American money, and that actually drives up costs, which means that making small indie UK films is more difficult at that end as well. It's not so much a question of the money coming in, it's how much you have to spend to do the same amount of work.
So budget inflation is definitely an issue for the independent sector. We cannot afford to pay what the streamers pay and what the inward investment people can pay to their actors and to the crew. And so we're scrambling around and promoting people perhaps too soon, so that somebody who's an assistant art director becomes a production designer too quickly. You need to have time to evolve your career and have experience doing different sorts of things as you make your way up the production ladder. And I think, we could I think support that by having, as James was saying, the apprenticeship thing, if that worked better for freelancers, I think that would enable people to be able to stay longer in the independent sort of nursery slopes.
Thank you, Damien. Giles.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm interested in the multifarious ways you raise money and the people you attract. What interests me, because I have some limited experience in this world, but what interests me is private investors. Are they harder to get hold of? Do they do it for the passion for the project, or are they looking for good returns?
Well, they're private investors. They're looking for good returns.
Right.
Of course, they are interested in the project, and I'm working with a private investor on Harvest, and without them I would not be doing it. But the cost of their money is very high. The cost of their money would easily make me be able to finish the film. It's huge cost. Probably 10% of the budget is money costs, and I think I really appreciate that they're taking this risk. And they're putting their money where their mouths are, but they will get the money back first. The director, myself, other producers have all had to take big deferrals in our fees, and we won't see that until way after all the financiers have properly recouped. So I'm actually not quite sure if there's any other industry where the CEO or the COO would actually be paid a third of what they're budgeted for.
Precisely, but is there a larger or shrinking pool of private investors?
I think the private investors are interested, but it's such a risk business. Maybe only 1 in 10 films is successful, really successful, bringing a big return. Our films tend to break even because we have a market all over Europe, and we sell around the world. We pre-sell and we sell around the world, but those sales have got smaller in recent years because of the market, and so that's another bit. But what was I trying to tell you?
I have no idea, but what I can help you with is what can government do to help private investors invest in film?
I think show confidence in the independent sector by supporting us with an increased tax credit. That would be really good. I think if I had an additional 15% going into the market, it gives me more confidence. It gives me the confidence to say, look, here I've got 45%, I've got 40% of the budget. You're only going to have to come up with 10%. Or, I can sell this here in Europe. It gives me broad shoulders. It makes me a force to be reckoned with. It makes me less subservient to the money. It makes me more confident with my projects and ideas and say, I've got this great idea. Look, this is how we can fund it. And rather than sort of bringing on this incredible sort of embroidered carpet full of different patches.
Again, so it goes
the
back
funders, I think a higher incentive for producers would bring private investment more happily to the table because they're taking less of a risk. We're taking more of a risk. I think that's how it works.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Simon?
Thank you. Do you think it's become harder to get public funders to put money into distinctly political content, films, television, etc.?
I don't think so. I think that... I don't think so. I think they've got less money, which isn't helpful. The films that I've done with Ken Loach have been publicly funded, partly publicly funded and partly privately funded. I mean, we've had, in fact, our best territory is France, and we've had, for the last 15 years, we've had incredible support from a French production company we co-produce with and a French sales company, because people in France, for some reason, I don't understand why, really like our films. I mean, it's great, but we definitely could not have survived without the support on definitely intrinsically political films, without the public service broadcasters. And I think they're not looking at it as political. They're looking at it as good filmmaking. They're looking at the talent behind it. You need to ask Ollie and Eva behind me, but I think, they're looking to make good stories, strong stories that people in this country or people can actually really see themselves reflected in. And it's like, what Sam Morton was saying when she won her BAFTA fellowship at the weekend. She wants to see stories, she wants to see films where her own life is reflected. People want to see themselves on the screen. That's the key to finding audiences, I think. If you show people themselves, show them that their lives matter, I think that's a key.
We know it costs a lot of money to put together a film, for example, but before we get to that stage, there's script development, right?
Yeah.
And that also takes time, effort and money.
Yeah.
Is that harder at that really early stage to get funding?
Very difficult. I mean, we did... this is a Brexit moment. We were members of. We did have the media fund from Brussels, which gave us slate funding, but we can get development money. We lost that, and I'd had that like 2 or 3 times, which gave me a chunk of money, about 150,000, to develop 5 screenplays. Fantastic seed money. I would love to have that again. To have a public fund, I could get that seed money. Public service broadcasters do give us that. BFI does as well. We can, but it's a much more competitive field, and I think actual slate funding is a really great thing to get. It's a very the BFI instituted this thing called the lock box, where if your film made any money, if they invested in the film. So say they invest 500,000 in a film, and that starts to recoup its money. They put half of that in a pot and give that money to the filmmakers as an advance against any profit the filmmaker might make at the end. And that money can only be spent on development or production. So we've used that money, the lockbox money, to develop further films, and that's been a very valuable thing. But it is expensive money, because you might have, out of 5 films you develop, you might only be able to get 1 to the screen. So development of screenplays is absolutely key to being able to have decent films,
I mean, really cheeky now. We are hearing from BBC Film and Film 4 next. What would you ask of them? What would you say to them?
I would just say keep supporting in the way that you have. I mean, I'm completely indebted to both. My career from the beginning happened because of Film 4. I grew up in the early days of Film on 4. I worked on My Beautiful Laundrette. I worked on all the sort of early working title stuff. I did, that's where I cut my teeth. Fantastic innovation of David Rose, who ran it first, to take films. It happened because films that were what were strictly independent films were being made as single TV dramas. Film 4 took those took the talent who were making those and put them on the big screen and made them into exhibitable cinema films. That was a great moment, and so I cut my teeth on that, going into making cinema from that. And so I'm indebted to those PSBs because of what they gave me, but also they do seek out very specifically innovative or original British talent, and they are working hard to get our films made, you know, and independent films made. So I mean, just keep up the good work.
Very diplomatic. Thank you.
Thank you, Simon. Alex.
Thank you. We'll come into Brexit in Europe in a moment. So I want you to answer this question not in that context. Are policymakers undervaluing the potential for co-productions, and what would you like the government to do to make them easier?
Well, co-productions are still possible in Europe because they come under the Treaty of Rome. So we are actually still able to do these complex 5 to 10 way co-productions. Every film I have done in the last 25 years has been a European co-production. So that is possible. There are other things that could support. I mean, we could rejoin Eurimage, which is a pan-European fund which supports European film. There are things that we could do, but I think they're almost sort of additional to our search for sort of independent support through the tax relief system, because I think that's something to focus on. There are lots of things that could be done that could help support co-production, of course. The main difference is we have to do carnets now. We have to get visas, and you've suddenly forgotten that we actually lost quite a lot of money on The Old Oak, our latest film, because our leading actress wasn't able to get a visa. We took a gamble, we pushed it to 2 weeks, but we lost, £50,000 as a result of not having a visa. So there are difficulties there that could be smoothed out. But I think co-production is really important. It gives you more territories to sell to. It broadens the market for our films, because every co-production you do also comes with a pre-sale usually. You like on Harvest, I've got Greek co-production, I've got Greek public money, I've got Greek private money, I've also got Greek tax credit, so I'm cutting the film there. In France, I've got TV which matches with German TV, so I've got a funny thing going on there, so I've got both of them. It's good stuff. But we need to be open to it, really.
Some of the things you mentioned there, visas and carnets, are the same issues that other creatives like touring musicians are experiencing. So maybe there's something the government could do there across the creative industries, because obviously that's one of our major income earners, export industries.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think we get 20 visas a year that we can use. And it's like if you've got to really be careful about running out of visas, because you do need to, if you're doing a co-production and getting money from those countries to support your film, you need to be able to do a bit of toing and froing.
Okay, so maybe it's more Brexit related. Has the withdrawal from Creative Europe been fully compensated by other initiatives, by UK initiatives to UK filmmakers?
No.
And is the UK focusing too much on US investments, the loss of European opportunities?
Yes.
No,
I mean, I think the a lot of us independents do work with Europe more. I do think we look across the Atlantic too hopefully. But on the other hand, it's important to have our American partners, because, if I've made a European film, actually, the key way in which I can make my money back is selling it for a stonking amount to the Americans. That's what I want to do. So it's like it's a sort of symbiotic process.
Where would you say the barriers are higher for co-production with the US or co-production with the European partners?
Oh, with the US, I would say. I mean, I think they don't have public money, whereas Europe, there's lots of little pockets of public money, and you sort of... I'm chatting up a Turkish TV station at the moment. I'm that desperate, and I'm very, very happy to work with the Turks, but it's like, really? Am I doing that? To close the funding on my film at the moment.
Thanks, Alex. Our own northeastern superstar.
Good morning, Rebecca. And I want to ask a question about the northeast of England. The Old Oak, Sorry We Missed You, and I, Daniel Blake were all set in the northeast of England. How important was North East Screen, which is based in my constituency in Sunderland, in informing your decision to shoot there?
I wouldn't say it was a reason why we set the films there at all. I think it is good to have a strong regional body that supports film. So, and most regions do have, like in Scotland's Creative Scotland, as I was on the board of South West Screen when that was going. They're important because they open doors for you. Mm-hmm. It wasn't the reason we chose to make the films there. We chose to make the films there because we found in the northeast a sort of microcosm of our country, and within Newcastle and Sunderland and Durham, and we found a world in which it was quite very easy to get around, very easy to. There's a sort of an accent that is rather beautiful, and there's also some very beautiful locations, and we found it was a really great sort of pocket world in which we could make our films. And the thing I love about filming on location somewhere like the Northeast is that it's really easy to get around. The great places. People are keen to help and support. Locations are easy to get. People are happy to have a film there, unlike in London where it's really difficult sometimes, and people don't charge too much. It's a really warm, friendly place to work. But the other thing that's really important about filming in different regions is people then, when they understand that you're making a film in their area, and you listen to their voices and you portray people from those areas, they take a cultural ownership of the film. The film becomes a Northeast film. We've had so much incredible support from the local TV people, all the local agencies, including Northeast Screen, giving us access to trainees, giving us access to local authorities and all that stuff, opening doors. That's important. But we would have. It wasn't because of them that we were there. But their help has been absolutely invaluable to the project's inception and creation.
And I suppose you've started to answer this, but what, if any, elements of the production process do you struggle to find facilities or workforces outside of London?
Well, it's difficult to find skilled film technicians. You can get trainees, you can get assistants. You usually have to bring in heads of department, although again in the Northeast we've been lucky enough to have terrific costume designer who worked her way up on TV and things. Jo Slater's just worked on all three of the films. We had assistant director from there. We had other, and we've also had people who've worked their way up during the course of our making those three films there, who've started off in a lower level and actually are now in more senior positions. So we've actually had our own sort of little factory going. So it's. I think the more, it's great to see in Scotland, for instance, having a wing of the National Film School there. It's important that people understand that you can actually cross over quite easily from film to TV, and I think that they are definitely transferable skills, but we did have to bring people up quite a lot. More than I would have liked. You want to be able to. So you look for people, and we certainly cast local people because we want the common voice, and that's really important. But you can't always get a focus puller, or you can't always get. But I mean, luckily our sound recordist now lives there, so he's moved in.
And what difference would an uplift to audio-visual expenditure credit for productions made outside of the southeast make to determining where you shoot a film? Would it help? Does it help?
It would help. It would help. I mean, everything I have done, pretty much. I mean, I think I've done 2 films in London in the last 25, 30 years. I've done everything in the regions or in Scotland or in Ireland. And, there aren't regional funds that can really support in terms of proper capital into the film, apart from Creative Scotland, and there is a fund in Wales. It's... And Creative Scotland has been real support for me on my latest project, for instance. So local funds and local regions can support, but they don't actually put money into it. So if you have value added from additional FTR, then you can definitely, again, feel more confident about setting the film in the place where it should be set. I mean, all of our films are location films. So we're always, wherever we go, creating a set out of the landscape or out of local buildings or whatever. I don't know if I've answered your question.
Oh, you have. Thank you very much, and I'm pleased you enjoyed your visits to the North East.
Oh, we went back twice.
Thank you.
Thank you, and even further north now. John.
Yes, as far north as it's possible to go, Scotland. Thank you very much for joining us. I've noticed you've mentioned Creative Scotland a few times, and it's good to hear that they've been so helpful. Can you tell us, in practical terms, what it is that they've done that has been so helpful?
So, our last 16 films has made 2 films in Scotland last year. One was Harvest, which we shot near Oban, round the back, in the most stunning landscape you can ever imagine. And another, which is a more urban film called On Falling, which we've produced. And Creative Scotland, in the case of On Falling, which is a first-time filmmaker, she's a Portuguese Edinburgh resident and a brilliant short filmmaker called Laura Carrera. And Creative Scotland saw her, helped her with her short films, nurtured the script that then became the film that we've made. So with Jack at 16 Films and Laura being able to develop their project with Creative Scotland, that's been huge. And then they came on board as co-producers. I got a Scottish producer on board to help me with Harvest because we were going to shoot the whole thing in Oban. And they then came on board with some additional funding to support Harvest. But they've also, the other great thing that they did was they've got specialist sort of film supporters in each of the areas. So we had the Argyll and Bute women who helped us find hotels and locations and just sort of on the ground support, helping us find potential trainees. That film uses a lot of craft and a lot of local musicians, and we got really deeply involved in the community in Harvest, and they helped us open those doors again. Again, helping with accommodation, helping us find the tools that we needed. I mean, pointed us in the direction of the Scottish Scything Festival, where we learned how to scythe for our harvest, all those sort of things.
So it's how I spend most of my holidays, actually.
Well, it's in your constituency, actually, the Scottish Scything Festival.
Now I'm embarrassed. I should have known that. Well, that's all great to hear. Tell me, what about the Scottish government? Are they helpful? I know that they're well disposed. I know that Angus Robertson, a former MP and now the Culture Secretary, is passionate about film.
I've not had any. I mean, I haven't needed, in a way, direct support from them, because I've had Scottish Screen, Creative Scotland, they never quite know which they are, but that's my only criticism of them. They have been incredibly supportive, as it were, I think, from the top down, I think, and the bottom up. I think both I think they've been just good eggs as far as we're concerned. And
a recurring theme throughout all of this is the difficulty in raising funds.
yes.
I was very struck by the couple of times you've mentioned how much you've lost in the chaotic aftermath of Brexit. You said at one point that Brexit had lost you £150,000.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I'd gone back to creative media, I would have been able to get another slate of 5 films up and running, I think. You know, I would have been able to apply for development money for my next slate. I mean, I'm a recognised producer in Europe because our films have done very well there throughout Europe. So I could go to them and get that funding.
But of course, the UK government promised that nobody would lose out.
Well, we have had funding from Creative Scotland, but only for that one project. We have had funding from BBC Film, but there isn't a sort of, and we can get funding. We have had funding from BFI through our lockbox that I explained.
Sure, but who's replaced, at a UK level, who's replaced the lost European money as you were promised?
I haven't seen it yet. I mean, Creative England could be the source for that. I'm not sure what they have in terms of development money available.
And I saw some of my colleagues shaking their heads in disbelief, horrified disbelief, when you said that one of your stars in your latest film wasn't able to get a visa.
Well, that was partly to do with Ukraine, actually, because this was for the Old Oak. She was she was from the Golan Heights, and when we were getting visas,
which is occupied
territory.
part of Syrian territory,
exactly,
occupied by the Israelis.
Yes. However, and she has a laissez-passer. That didn't matter where she was from. The fast track that we would normally have been able to use was completely closed down because of Ukraine visas becoming the priority. Because this was May 2022. So we did get her. But it was a very, and I did need to pull a few strings, and actually it was funnily enough, the mayor of Tyneside who pulled out some stops for us.
You said you lost 50,000 in the process.
Yeah, because we had to stop the film. We had to stop pre-production. We had to push the film by 2 weeks, and we were already very close to production.
Because of chaos in the
Because
Home
of
Office.
chaos, and because we couldn't, we just had to shut down for 2 weeks.
Dreadful.
Yeah.
But apart from that, some inspiring testimony and wonderful work over many years. You mentioned My Beautiful Laundrette. I think for a generation of gay kids, that was inspiring, because it was people talking to us at a time when it was pretty grim out there.
Yeah. No, my job was finding the locations on that, so I found the laundrette.
There's a laundrette in Finnieston in Glasgow that I think took its inspiration from that, and they've created a very beautiful laundrette which looks very much like that set. Anyway, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you, John. Last but not least, Clive.
Thank you, and thanks for coming to give evidence today. So Ken Loach has said that The Old Oak might be his last film. I mean, is he unique, or are there other Ken Loaches out there? And if they're not, how do we find them?
Ken is unique. There's only one Ken Loach. I mean, he spanned 60 years of
in the way he makes his films, I'm really driving.
Well, yes, actually. I don't know anybody. I mean, he learnt his game largely from watching Czech New Wave and Italian New Wave filmmakers who put the person, the people, centre stage in so much as they are. He films at a very human level. There's no sort of low angle or high angle. Everything's on a level. The camera stands back and gently observes rather than being crashing in. It's a very, very specific style. And so there's nobody who really can do it. We've never showed the script to people before we film. We tell them who they are, but they don't know what. So we've always filmed in sequence, so people never know what's going to happen to them in the story. So it's a very unique way of telling stories. But I also have to say that it's not just Ken. It's also Paul Laverty, who's written most of the screenplays that Ken has done, certainly in the second half of his career. And those stories which are very intrinsically about contemporary human life and issues that we all encounter. And it just showing people themselves on the screen is what we've been trying to do.
So I mean, I appreciate how long he's been around. I went to school with children from the workhouse where he filmed Newington Lodge, where he filmed Kathy Come Home. And my friends' younger siblings were with their mum were extras in Kathy Come Home. So from a childhood I've known his work, but perhaps it's setting the bar too high to say where's the next Ken Loach coming from. But where do we get the next talent of independent filmmakers?
There's lots of talent, and we've got good film schools. I think that, as James was saying, the nursery slopes where people train in these television programs where they're doing a lot of TV very fast gives them really good experience working with actors. Working in the theatre is important. Just actually not just going straight into independent film I think people need to learn their craft, and short films is the other way. So there are plenty of people who want to do it, and there are plenty of short films being made for nothing, and with small amounts of support from some of the public funders. And those are the nursery slopes, and there are film schools, there's the National and there's London Film School who really support those people coming through. But actually getting hard graft experience on telly, doing soaps or whatever, that's where you really learn, that's where you have your apprenticeship. I mean, my own apprenticeship was 2 years working on a multicultural kids TV series, commission number 3 at Channel 4 it was, with Michael Rosen. And that was like making lots and lots of little films about kids and around the country. And that was my grounding. To have that apprenticeship was fantastic, and that was in telly and was really valuable in terms of learning how to do all the bits and pieces that you need to do as a producer. So there isn't another Ken Loach, but there are some amazing filmmakers, and that we're seeing some fantastic people coming through.
He's famous for taking people who've got no background in acting and putting them in front of a camera. Does that make it a lower budget film and easier to fund in any way?
Well, we've discovered a few people. I mean, like Martin Compston is one of those people that we put in front of a camera, and we had to pay him to come to the audition. We paid him a £5 because he wasn't interested; he just wanted to play football. So, but Martin Compston has had a big television career, having been in Sweet 16.
But does that mean you're good at? You were talking earlier on about having to take local people and train them up. Does that mean that you're a good route into the industry?
You still pay the equity minimum, or the equity, or a proper equity, and for the lead actors, even if they haven't done it before, they're still actors and they still get paid properly for doing the role. They might not get paid the same as Benedict Cumberbatch or Tom Hiddleston, but they will get. But they get properly paid for doing their job.
Well, you mentioned Benedict Cumberbatch, and of course, famously, he was absolutely top, an outstanding actor. And but there's been a lot about the ease with which people from certain backgrounds can get into things like acting. Is it the same behind the camera? Is there a class barrier there? I think that there are real efforts to get people from all walks of life behind the camera. It is, I think, there is always this thing of people
being, getting into the industry because they know somebody and all the rest of it. They're only any good if they're any good, and they don't last long if they're not any good. But I think there are all sorts of schemes that, I think Creative Skill Set, for instance, really puts a lot of effort into making pathways for people to come into the industry. I do a lot of, I do things like go and speak at schools and things, and there are ways in which people need to what they need to do is find out about the industry, find out that it's not just directing isn't the only job or camera isn't the only job. There are there's a myriad of different wonderful jobs that you can discover. And I think if there are, and Creative Skill Set is finding paths, but I think the more of that is done regionally also, the better, the more roots in. And people, actually so often people from the middle of nowhere are often the most exciting people to work with because they've got they bring their excitement, and they bring, they're not jaded by a system. They just want to work, and they discover the industry.
So just last question, to break down those barriers, behind the camera, so that people can get into the industry. Is there anything that's not being done that you think should be done?
Well, actually, I think that we're missing out on stuff in the curriculum. Actually, I think that. I know that some of our films have been on the curriculum, but I think that drama and the creative arts are very, very important in the curriculum for people to understand how these things are made, and that they can't just be made by one phone, that you actually do need a team to make things. So I think it actually starts really quite young, and I think that that wonderful experience, and I have to say this was mine, of people wheeling out the screen at school and showing you a film like Kess or Bambi or whatever it was, that amazing moment of seeing something on a big screen with an audience and feeling you're part of that audience. That's exciting. And for children then to learn that you can do that, you can actually be part of that, is a very exciting thing. I loved learning getting into film that way because I love watching the big screen.
Well, it is very sad if there's going to be no more Ken Loach films, that's for sure. Thank you.
I'm sure he'll be sad too.
Live. Rebecca, thank you so much for your time today. Have you got any other messages for our committee before we let you leave?
The obvious one really, which is I think that the film tax relief has been a great success, and if we can use it, expand on it to make it work for, the very flawed independent sector that I'm part of, then I think that would be a really, really good move.
Thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you.
I invite our final panel to come forward, please. You're happy to kick off a bit?
Yeah, you're going to start.
Yeah. Just battling her way through. So our final panel today is Evie Yates, Director of BBC Film, and Ollie Madden, Director of Film 4, whose silverware cupboard is a little bit fuller today after the weekend's BAFTA ceremony. Huge welcome to both of you. Thank you so much for your time today. We're going to have John kicking off the question.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for joining us. I think there's quite a lot of concern, isn't there, about Channel 4 and the proportion of programming that's made in Scotland. Ofcom have specific rules, don't they, for the level of production that there should be out with England, and it doesn't appear to be the percentage that you'd expect for the population. How concerned are you about that?
The channel's commitment to production in the nations and regions is very significant, and
I'm not talking about the regions of England. I'm talking about Scotland,
and indeed Scotland. And Film 4 specifically has had great experiences making films in Scotland. Very recently with films like Limbo, and we're about to make another film called Midwinter Break in Scotland. So that's very important to us at Film 4.
Yeah, but nonetheless, in percentage terms, as I say, the population of Scotland, just on a percentage basis, you'd expect a higher proportion to be made out with England than is happening at the moment. So I think a lot of people in Scotland feel a bit shortchanged about that.
As I say, we look to tell stories across the UK, and it's very important to us that we are telling stories that are, not London-centric and represent the country as a whole and the UK as a whole. So that's something we'll continue to do, and continue to look for diversity and geography and points of view and cultures.
Yeah, but that's not addressing the point I'm making about the percentages. So you only get 9% production out with England at the moment. That's my understanding. Is that correct?
Sorry,
You only get 9% of production out with England at the moment. Is that correct?
Can you clarify? You're talking about Channel 4's content spend?
Well, yes. I'm making a direct contrast with BBC film, who have a 16% out of England quota. And I know Channel 4 is very proud of its diversity, but actually when you look at the figures, to see that BBC Film is making so much more than Channel 4 is in a way quite surprising.
We've spent £35 million outside London in the last 5 years, which is a significant number. That's obviously our spend, and that there's a huge amount of spillover spend.
In percentage terms, why so much less than the BBC?
It's difficult to comment. We, as I say, it's a hugely important thing to us to spend our money.
You don't really have an answer to this, do you?
In percentage terms, I'd need to come back to the committee on those numbers.
I'm giving the figures. That's a very significant difference, and it's, as my granny would have said, it's a fine bird, the puddock. It's great to say that you've this wonderful commitment, but then when you actually boil down the figures and see the huge gap between the BBC and Channel 4, it's significant.
As I say, we are committed to spending as much money as possible outside London. We are always looking for.
I know you have said that. Eva Yates. I mean, obviously the BBC's doing better than Channel 4. What tips do you think the BBC can give Channel 4 on how to get its percentages up?
I don't want to be pitted against each other in this particular moment. I think the work we've done in Scotland recently has been a few factors in that. I think one, After Sun has had a huge impact on what it looks like for Scotland to be making independent film. I think it's given a lot of people the feeling that they could make something similar. I think it was a film which really worked well globally. It was a Scottish talent, it was a Scottish story. Obviously came at a moment when the actor who was leading that role, leading that film, was at a really sort of peak point in his career. I think it's given a lot of people the incentive to be ambitious about what they're making. I think we have a very close partnership with Screen Scotland, and we've partnered a lot with them on projects. We've developed a lot we've taken to them, and equally they've developed that they brought to us. I also think we've been working to build the relationship between BBC Film, BBC Scotland and BBC Alba. We did quite a lot of work at Edinburgh Film Festival. I mean, I'm Scottish also, just to add to that in case you can't hear it in my voice. So
I can hear it.
But we've done a bit of work with them to try and build closer relationships there, to try and work out how we can look at how we address
It's interesting that you mentioned BBC Alba there, because this committee is just about to launch an investigation into minority languages in these islands, and of course Gaelic is one of the languages that we're looking at. BBC Alapa has had a significant effect, hasn't it, on Gaelic and putting Gaelic voices on screen so that people realise that it's a vibrant, living language. Before I hand back to the chair, what do you think the significance and importance is of film in the survival of languages, looking ahead to our next report, especially vulnerable languages like Gaelic?
I think film is very important and television is very important. Actually, the work that's being done in television creates a more consistent, generates more consistent content in terms of the scale of what's being made. So it's fantastic that there's work happening there. I think the conversation we're having with BBC Alba now around Gaelic language films is an interesting one, because we're looking at how and what needs to be put in place in order for that to happen. So what we tried to do at Edinburgh last year is bring together talent that was working with BBC Scotland, BBC Alba and BBC Film, so that we could start to see the ways that those different sections within the filmmaking community in Scotland could interact a bit more. So actually people who might be working in Gaelic language in TV could start moving towards working in film. How do you find the right idea? I think a film like The Quiet Girl has been brilliant for Irish language and making people believe that there's actually a market out there for language, non-English language films, native language films that could be successful. So I think it's about finding the right project and the right way to do it, because we want to make sure that we're making things of as high quality as possible and also reflecting the right stories and how we do that.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. So I don't know if you've seen the evidence that Gurinder Chadha gave when she came and appeared before our committee, but one of the things she said was that Film 4's founder, David Rose, had this kind of vision which had effectively defined a new era for British film. I wondered if you could both kind of set out what your vision is for the future of British film, but also how you see us being able to tackle the decline of British film at the box office. Eva, do you want to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think in terms of vision, I mean, I think you're all aware of this, but we at BBC Film is we're developing and co-financing projects. So there's also a department in the BBC which is acquiring things. So we're specifically the sort of making arm of the film work that's done at the BBC. We sit within the content division at the BBC. We have 11 million a year to spend, so we have a very modest budget for what we try to achieve. We make about 15 films a year with that money, and we also make short films, but we do that always in partnership with other people. So we don't have the financial ability to cope to solely finance anything that we do. So the partnership model is really, really crucial, and sort of part of why that this, I'm very, very glad to be in this room having this conversation with you all and being able to address how big some of these issues are. I think what I really hope we can get to is a place where there is, and the word has been used already today, but where we can get to a better place of resilience. So at the moment what we have is an incredibly successful inward investment sector, and that inward investment sector has become really vital in terms of its economic value. It's incredibly valuable in terms of the workforce. It's generating a lot of content, but what's happening at the other end of the industry is there's not a lot of funding. There's a lot of people who are leaving the industry. There are a lot of very talented people who are leaving the industry. There's a lot of brilliant new talent coming through, which has been a big priority for us and for Film 4 in recent years. And actually how we keep that talent here, making their stories here and telling British stories rather than telling British stories that they shoot in other countries or telling American stories. I think that's something that we want to really make sure actually we don't want, it feels like there's a break in the pipeline, and how we can make this become something which is really beneficial for everybody, and looking after that indigenous part of the industry. I think that's the biggest thing we hope for in these conversations.
I'd concur. I mean, British film has an incredible history and lineage, and in fact this year we're seeing some incredible British films, some we've backed and many others, from The Zone of Interest to All of Our Strangers to obviously Oppenheimer. But the huge, as Eva has said, the huge growth in the inward investment industry, which is great for the UK and great for the industry, has had some side effects, and one of those is an increase in production costs and a difficulty getting cinema screens for independent film. And when these independent films are able to be made, they can reach huge audiences globally. So we're really focused on removing the barriers to those films being made.
Talk me through about your budgets and the number of films that you're able to back and how that's changed over the last decade. Ollie, could you?
So yes, over the last 9 or so years, our budget has annually been around £25 million, and we co-finance, because we, like the BBC film, we always partner with other financiers, between 8 and 12 films on average each year.
Eva, what was your figure?
So we have a budget of 11 million, which is inclusive of overhead. We use that across development and production, and that has not increased in a decade.
Your figures have stayed the same, but obviously costs have
grossly inflated.
By what sort of proportion would you say?
I mean, I think 5 or 6 years ago you could make a debut for 1.2 million. Now I think all of them are costing 3.
So, what difference does that make to the number of? Does that mean you've co-financed a less amount to the same number of films, or that you co-finance less?
I guess what we try to do is leverage our involvement by finding a greater number outside of the building. So on average, if we put £1 into a film, we tend to have to go and find 6, across all of our films, it tends to work out that we bring in £6 for every £1 we spend. So if we spend 11 million a year, we're making the slate that we make in that year might be 60, 70 million pounds in total in terms of all of those budgets.
Is that the same, Ollie? Your figure stayed roughly 25
Ours has been flat, so yeah, the proportional value that we're able to support and offer has gone down, and that has had an impact, and as Eva says, the cost of making particularly first-time features has shot up, so we're able to make fewer than we would like to. We make a minimum of 4 every year, but we would like to make more. And it has become harder finding particularly private money, commercial money, to make first-time features because they are very risky. And so that's an issue that we recognise.
So you'd have heard the evidence we've heard already today, and you'd have actually heard Alex's excellent question that he asked James at the top of this about if you had the opportunity to speak to the Chancellor ahead of the budget next week, or in a couple of weeks' time, what would you ask for differently, and would additional tax relief for lower budget films make a difference for you?
I think it would make a huge difference. What we're seeing in very blunt terms is the cost. There's a gap, a differential between the cost of making these films and the perceived value in the marketplace. And something like a 15% gap, particularly for films under £15 million, which is the budget area that we tend to work exclusively in, would mean the difference between films happening or not. And a couple of other points I want to raise on that. The difference between producers and production companies being able to earn a fair fee for their work and not having to defer their fees, and allowing them to build much more sustainable businesses, because too often you see producers having to defer so much of their fees that it's unsustainable, and they struggle to make their next film, or even don't stay in the industry because it's too hard to build a business. And then the second point I want to raise is about IP, which I know you've heard about, and I'm sure the committee is aware of the pre-sale market, and we often producers often pre-sale the rights to their films in order to get them made, and that can have many benefits, but one of the downsides is if you pre-sell at a lower level than you might be able to sell the film for at if you've made it and proved its value. And one of the ways that independent film can be commercially successful is by holding back the rights to films, particularly in North America, which is one of the biggest markets. And a difference in that tax credit relief would allow more producers to hold back, particularly the North American rights to their films, and then see greater upside and more value to their IP once the film is made.
And Eva, did you have anything to add to that?
No, same message. I think the tax credit could have transformative effect. I think we're sort of at the point where we are at risk of losing a huge number of really talented people from the industry, and I think there's both an immediacy to that as a possible solution, but there's also an opportunity to bring some confidence back into an industry which has really been battered over the last few years between the strikes, the effects of COVID, and the massive changes to the structure of the marketplace. So. And I think the work that has been done by PACT and by BFI and the report that's been presented to you all already around how that work might be framed has had a huge amount of thought and input into it. So I think we're very aligned with that report around how both the bracketing of the budget that's been presented and also the ways in which it might be implemented feels like a really good way to address in the immediate an industry that also needs to think about its sustainability and resilience in the longer term.
So in this longest ever elevator journey with the Chancellor that we're all taking at the moment, would that be your key ask? Would that be your...
I think that's the primary ask across the industry. I think the industry is pretty aligned on that being the most immediate high impact thing that could be done.
As independent producers have found it harder to raise other sources of finance, how has their ask of you changed in this sort of environment?
They ask for more money from us. They ask for us to sit in a different position around the recoupment, so it's much harder for us to bring anything back in. The amount of resource it takes to support them through that process is different. I now go to film festivals and spend the whole time meeting other financiers so that I can try and bring those introductions into the British industry and to those independent producers. I don't get to watch films anymore. It's completely different, but I think also our job at the BBC really is to sit side by side with those producers and find every way we can to support them to try and both grow their businesses and help them make the best films possible and meet what we want, which is to provide great work for our audiences, to represent Britishness, to think about the cultural value of the stories that we're telling, and to do the best with what we've got. Yeah.
Anything to add to that, Ollie?
No, I concur. Yeah.
Good. We like that agreement. Julie,
thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, both. It's afternoon now. What would be the impact of bringing BBC Film and Film 4's output under the Made Outside London quotas on the amount of production taking place beyond the South East? Or would there be an impact?
I think it's such a huge priority for the BBC, and it's such a big priority for us at BBC Film. I mean, Rebecca's already talked about The Old Oak. We also made a film called Blue Jean up in the North East over the last few years. I think it's a film that's had an incredible impact culturally. That film ended up setting in that place and telling that story because it was authentic to the experiences of the people who the film was talking about. So the motivation was there just around the desire to tell the stories of everyone in this country. And for us, that was really motivating because we obviously want to be representing everyone who's paying the licence fee. I don't know if you have more to add around it.
Well, just that when we're looking for stories and storytellers who we want to back, we're always looking for authenticity in the storytelling, and it starts with that and specificity. And so I think our position would be it's better to do that and making sure that we're supporting and backing the diversity of voices and cultures and points of view and stories, and then thinking about how to tell those authentically and shooting them in a place that represents them authentically, rather than a quota-driven system where you're thinking about that before the storytelling.
So, am I right in taking from those answers that you don't think it would make a difference?
I think anything that encourages people to do these things is good and should be explored. All I'm saying is and we also work with partners, so it may incentivise partners in a way that's really positive. I think for BBC, there's such a priority around this work anyway, and the proportion, BBC as a whole makes 58% outside of London. In drama, it makes 70% outside London, so there's an enormous amount of work that's happening there already, and I think some of these questions have to go hand in hand with how we think about skills, how we think about new talent, all of these other things, so that we're sort of addressing things about capacity and that sort of thing as well.
Okay. Would an uplift to audiovisual expenditure credit, that is such a mouthful to say, for productions made outside of the southeast of England make a difference to where you film?
Again, I think it's worth exploring because it's incentivising. For BBC, I don't think it would have impact because we're so focused on it, but I think it's sort of the same answer actually. It could have quite a lot of impact in terms of the broader industry.
Ollie?
Yeah, I'd agree. We'd be open to anything that would help us with our shared aim of shooting as much as we could across the UK.
And should streaming platforms face the same obligations as public sector broadcasters to make a certain amount of content outside of London?
I'm not sure it's for us to dictate what the streamers do, but I do think we should all be collectively incentivising how we make sure that we're addressing some of these big questions and how it impacts all across the UK.
Ollie?
We're very open to anything that helps support particularly the independent film sector across the UK. So
you wouldn't be opposed to it?
Absolutely not, no.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, Julie. Simon?
Thank you, Chair. What more could be done to make the BBC, Channel 4 and other broadcasters screen more independent films, even?
Sorry, I missed the middle of that. What more could be done for us
to... BBC, Channel 4 and other broadcasters screen more independent films?
Screen more? As I've mentioned, we have an £11 million budget that hasn't changed in 10 years. So I think what we're trying to do with the money we have is a lot already. I think if you hear the numbers that we're trying to leverage in order to get some of these films made, I think we're working pretty hard with what we can do already. We have an acquisition department who also works extensively to bring as much as they can onto iPlayer, and we have a really substantial offering of British and global films on iPlayer, which are all now there for a year once they've screened on BBC. So there is an awful lot.
You're asking for Tim Davie to give you more money, basically.
We would be delighted to have more money, but we're also looking at a real, in real terms, BBC's budget overall in the last 10 years is down by 30%. So I understand there's some incredibly difficult decisions to be made around what we do and don't spend money on.
Ollie?
Film on Channel 4, both our streaming platform and our linear channel, is incredibly important, and British film is incredibly important. It's about a fifth of the films on our platform are British, most of which are Film 4 productions. So our priority is making sure we back as many brilliant films as we can that can then entertain audiences on our channel. And there's been huge growth, actually, 40% growth just in the last year in terms of films' presence or viewership on Channel 4 streaming. So it's something we're really focused on trying to grow further.
If a film has been rejected at the commissioning stage, then made independently and offered to your channels for acquisition, how is that decision taken and the fees set? Ollie, back to you first.
That's something I'd have to come back to the committee on, having spoken to the acquisitions department, because there is a separate department at Channel 4 that looks after the acquisitions of films.
Do you mean the value of the acquisition? Yeah, there's so many factors that go into that around the scale of the film, the perceived viewership of it, the many different things that make it valuable to the BBC. But what we do try to do in BBC Film is make sure that we keep the value within that TV. When we do commission and make things at that stage and we put license fee in, we try to make sure that we hold as much value as possible for filmmakers. So we're both getting value for the BBC in terms of making the film, but also we're making sure that those producers have a good amount of money in order to acknowledge the acquisition of those rights from our point of view.
Talking of producers then, how confident are you that the fees BBC Channel 4 pay to license films are broadcast adequately reward producers and distributors for the financial risk they've obviously undertaken to deliver the product?
That's a bit of a question around partnership, because we partner in everything we do. So the budget comes to us with those fees presented to us. We look at that. If we feel they're at a level which is too low, we'll discuss that. We get very involved in that process. I do think there's a major issue, because there is as Ollie referenced earlier, and actually Rebecca referenced too, there is a ongoing issue around producers deferring their fees when they reach the crisis point where they can't make the cost of their film meet the budget that they managed to raise. We have had to substantially raise our investment in a number of films over the last few years in order to get them to the point where they've been makeable. But it's quite difficult for us to continue to do that without starting to lose the overall amount of films that we're able to make in any given year.
Ollie?
Yes, I mean, we look very closely at the amount we're paying for the licensing of the rights, the free-to-air and associated rights, and we pay fairly, and as Eva says, if we feel producers have not apportioned enough of our investment to that, then we increase it. And we also work very closely with UK theatrical distributors to make sure that our rights dovetail properly with the rights that they're exploiting, theatrical and Pay One, as it's known, on streaming platforms, so that our producers can get their films distributed as effectively as possible in all the media in the UK.
Thank you.
So can I just add one last thing to that, which is just to say, I do think I cannot stress enough how important British producers are in the indie sector. Actually, what they do, what they have to do, they have to raise the money, they have to work through the creative process of the film. What they do is incredibly difficult, and I think the level of innovation we've seen in the last few years has been absolutely extraordinary, but it's also kind of reached crisis point. So it's a really good question to be asking, because I think everything we can collectively do to support producers better, we need to address, and it's certainly something we're doing quite actively internally at the moment at BBC Film.
Before I actually hand back the chair, just thinking about what was discussed earlier, I think you were in the audience earlier on waiting for your turn very patiently. You heard earlier about the impact of AI and AI's kind of the huge change that could occur as opposed if AI takes over in that way, with entire films being, it's terrifying to think about, entire films being scripted and put together by AI. Would you have any qualms about putting these on your platforms? An entirely AI film, or a film has been...
It's BBC works on 3 principles around AI, which I'll read because I don't want to get them wrong.
Go for it,
we always act in the best interest of the public. We always prioritise talent and creativity, and we're always open and transparent. So those are the 3 things I think we want to look after. I think James made some great points about it. We want to make sure that what we're doing is protecting people's IP, and we also want to make sure that everything we're making sure that what we're not doing is using misinformation or presenting misinformation. So that's obviously particularly cool for the BBC. So those things all need to be factored in. Right now, there isn't a process to declare whether or not something has AI in it. So that's something we've been discussing. Actually, if we receive a script, do we need someone to declare that's part of what's been done? There's a conversation around what virtual production looks like and what it means to use AI to make, the backgrounds of a film versus whether or not we're going to let AI, generative AI, write a script. So there's hugely different impacts. If we can harness some of it, it's really, really useful. And actually, it can be an operational thing, which is very useful. On the other end of it, we obviously don't want to lose the human connection that makes what we all do as in the arts worth doing. It is such a human endeavour. So I think I would absolutely not say we would have qualms about showing something, but I think we would do it within a framework that made it clear that that's what it was.
Fascinating. Ollie?
Well, more broadly, I think AI and generative AI can be an incredible tool, and in fact, it's already been used quite extensively, particularly in the post-production of films. It's brought down the cost of post-production quite significantly, and that's a tool that filmmakers are able to use very effectively. We share all the same concerns that James spoke about eloquently earlier in terms of protecting IP, and individuals' rights of portrayal, etc., and obviously were behind all the work that the unions in America were doing to ensure those protections. But I also believe absolutely in the fundamental depiction of sentient humans and something very specific to that AI I think is going to struggle to replicate, but we're also aware of the great power of it and the speed at which it's developing. So it's an area that we're looking at very closely.
Thank you. So it's like an ongoing conversation.
Thank you, Simon. Ollie, can I just take you back to something you said a while ago about how difficult it is to get cinema screens for films? Because when we've taken evidence from some of the exhibitors, some of the cinema groups, they bemoan the fact that there is a lack of decent content coming through. So what's the issue here, and who holds the solution?
I think it's a supply issue. We have a film that opens this Friday called Wicked Little Letters. That's one of the widest releases Studio Canal, its distributor, has ever had. It's opening in about 695 locations, wider than Paddington 2, which is a huge hit. So there is huge demand there from cinemas, from exhibitors for British film. But what everyone we've been talking to is saying is there aren't enough of them being made, that there's a lack of supply. So our responsibility and our priority is making sure we can back as many great films as possible to ensure there's a steady supply and to ensure that we don't have these gaps in the supply when you have labour strikes in America, as the industry saw last year.
Other than, because there are more films being made than virtually ever before, but when you say supply, you mean supply of a certain type of film?
Of British independent films,
right.
Yes. Obviously, the inward investment films, the big Hollywood blockbusters that are many of which are being shot here, are in good supply, and that's great. That's great for the British film economy. But there has been a reduction in the number of British independent films being made, and a reduction in the box office for those films because there are fewer of them.
Do you subscribe to the view that there should be a kind of a greater promotion of sort of best of British films, some kind of dedicated screen? I don't know, something in cinemas that champions British independent filmmaking?
Open to any ideas that can help that sector, but I'm a believer in, if you make great films and you distribute them well and market them well, because marketing is absolutely crucial to get the films out there, then the audiences will come. So I think that's the key thing. And we work incredibly closely, not just in the development and production of our films, but also with our distribution partners to make sure the films are being marketed as effectively as they can be.
Thank you.
Thank you. You'll be pleased this is the last one. Is the Films Skills Fund working as well as it could, Ollie?
It's working effectively, we feel. However, there are some areas just more generally in terms of skills that we would like to see working better. One of those is to do with more mid-career development. There's been a huge, quite rightly, focus on early career and traineeships and apprenticeships, but we feel there's an opportunity for more training for practitioners who are in the middle of their careers or more advanced in their careers. So that's an area that we'd like to see develop.
Eva, anything from you?
Yeah, I think the question, there's definitely a lot of work being done right across the industry around bringing people in. BBC spends 20 million a year on bringing apprentices through. Lots of money is spent by BFI, lots of money is spent by Skillset. There's a lot of work that's happening. There's a big retention issue. So I think there's a lot of work being done around new talent, but actually people who are leaving, really experienced people leaving the industry is obviously a huge problem. So it's frustrating to be training lots of new people when there's actually brilliant, experienced people who could be doing these jobs but are not choosing to stay in the industry. I think there's a big issue, and particularly with independent producers, actually it's incredibly difficult for them to build companies. So what they don't have is HR, what they don't have is a sort of framework for how they support the freelancers who are working with them. So I think it would be really helpful, and I know there is already concerted efforts around this to try and think about how we help people understand how to manage people and how to support people well. We know that there are mental health issues across the industry. It's a very, very difficult environment to work in a lot of the time. We'd like to continue to see more of that work being done. There's already a lot of work being done on that, and there are people available on every set, and there are policies around how we work in those ways already, but I think there's even more work to do on that as well. But again, there's a big supply question, and part of the reason it's so difficult in independent film is because those people who are coming into the industry move very, very quickly into the inward investment sector. So actually, as soon as we've found somebody who we've given an opportunity to and started to think that we'll be able to work with them as an experienced practitioner in the industry, they're swept up into those spaces. So we're scrabbling to keep the chain going.
Right. I'm MP in Leeds, and Leeds BFI, Screen Yorkshire, Channel 4 do some great work around skills and bringing forward people from underrepresented groups. You talked about mid-career apprenticeships, supporting people in the industry so they don't leave. What more can we do to ensure that people from underrepresented communities see film as a career for them and have a pathway into the career? We often hear that people get in because they know other people, they have links. What happens to people who don't have any links, but just have a dream, maybe the skills as well?
I think there's a question there around who gets to make the films, and then there's a question around what do crews look like. In terms of who gets to make the film, I think that slightly feeds the second question, because I think something like Rye Lane, actually, where we had a huge number of HODs, black HODs or HODs who kind of represented the story that they were making, makes a big difference. We had the same in a film we did a few years called Blue Story, actually going into that room and seeing all of those HODs building that project, and then going out into the industry and working across all sorts of different projects had huge impact. I think it's quite a lot to do with us making the right decisions around what we do and don't put on screen, and some of that follows. I also think there is actually quite concerted work around what the how diversity is dressed within the work that's already being done at Screen Skills. We've implemented some things ourselves in areas that we see a particular gap. So we have an associate producer scheme because we felt there was a real lack of producers from varied backgrounds across the industry. So we've been working on that, and we now have 8 productions a year where we support somebody to move into producing, having had some experience but not a lot of experience on a feature film. That's had huge impact. Those producers are now on our slate making their own films. We have Small Indie Fund at the BBC, and that's very focused on nations and regions and diverse-led indies. So that work is also being done.
I'd add that we have a similar associate producer scheme, and that which is focused on producers from underrepresented backgrounds. And I think when I think back to when I started in the industry, I remember reading a list of the key producers of British independent film, and I think if I drew up that list today, it would not have grown or changed, evolved in the way that we would like. And I completely agree with Eva. Independent producers are absolutely fundamental. They are the employers. They're the people who we look to build diverse crews and tell diverse stories. And it's vital that we support that sector and support those producers. So and it's very hard actually to get training as a producer on the job, as it were, work-based training, and so that's an area that we've been similarly focused on to make sure that producers can grow and develop and build sustainable businesses.
Thank you, and finally Giles.
Thank you very much. Yes, I thought it just occurred to me because for donkey's years I've been shouting about the soft power that our cultural exports generally and more specifically our performing arts do affect what we sell to the world, UK PLC. I just want to know, do you think the industry itself is doing enough to make that point when we talk about getting tax breaks, when we talk about raising finance, when we talk about artistic dividend from government? because we've touched on it briefly during this session this morning, all three panels, but I don't think enough is made of it from the industry generally. So when we say we need a tax break, it's not just that we can do great film, whatever, but also so that people who are perhaps the more sceptical can say, actually, no, we can see benefits. Because since the time of Shakespeare, we have been brilliant at punching above our weight through our artistic exports. We need to do more. What more do you think the industry can do?
I mean, I really agree with you. I think the impact of, I mean, my favourite thing when we make a film, I mean, obviously awards are great, festivals are great, box office is great, all of those things. But when you get a message from someone who tells you how meaningful that story has been to them, I think it's that, you know, there is a power, there's obviously the soft power of how those films go out into the wider world, what it means globally. I think we're very privileged as the BBC to immediately have people's ear when we put things out into the world because of their recognition of the quality of the things that come through the BBC. So we sort of have that captive audience, which is always very, very helpful in the work that we're putting out. But it's also what we're saying back to ourselves. And I think that has been sort of seeing some of the more original or authored work which has shown a particular sector of society or a particular experience that feels quite particular and not that explored before. When you tell those unrepresented stories, it has the most extraordinary personal impact. So there's the question of how it's out there in the world, and yes, we should be shouting about it very, very loudly.
All of that's absolutely great,
Yeah.
but what you've got to do is get into dry old, dusty old politicians' minds who are looking elsewhere at other things and tell them how important it is. Ollie, do you any views on
Well, I completely agree, and I hope this committee, and I'm sure this committee is as proud of what British film is able to do culturally, commercially, societally. We're involved with The Zone of Interest, which is a film that is currently on release across the world, and we're getting reports back to Eva's point about how timely and resonant they're finding the film in terms of conflicts that are going on today, the ability of British storytellers to reach a global audience, because we're here to support British film, but we make films for a global audience, is something to be incredibly proud of and something to support in every way we can.
Because I've always held that we eat McDonald's and drink Coca-Cola because of the power of the American film industry. Let's get them drinking Tetley tea. Thank you, Chair.
Very much.
Yorkshire tea.
Yes, thank you so much for your time today. Thanks for your... was there anything that we didn't cover that ChatGPT didn't provide us with that you wanted us to ask? In which case, if you do think of anything that you feel we need to add to our evidence, please don't hesitate to drop us a line afterwards. But we're really grateful for your time today. We are going to continue to take evidence on British film and high-end TV, but I think we're beginning to hear quite a strong message that's coming through time and time again that we need to do more to support independent film here in the UK. So we hope the Treasury are listening. We will certainly be watching. But in the meantime, we're really, really grateful for your help and support today. Order.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.